Okay, so with a little bit of trial and error, I have come up with a way to do MILVS installation without undoing this bolt and using the shim. So I have done this on a bench on a head I did not care about, and I made it work. But again, I didn't care about the head, so if I damaged it, it wasn't going to matter. However, this is my car, so I kind of need this to get to work. And I did not feel very comfortable when I did this first one. I had to back it off a lot, and even with 2 washers in there, I could not get this shim out of there. It would not come out. So I had done this before on the bench again on the same head that I didn't really care about, so I wanted to show you what I'm doing. So instead of undoing this top spring, you pull down here. It's kind of hard to see. There's the spring goes behind the secondary rocker shaft, and it holds it against the cam. So when the Valvetronic actuator rotates, it pushes this intermediate rocker against this spring and this roller shim thing, and that's what changes the lift. So all you really need to do is I got some 5/16 nylon rope, and I'm just going to pull on this little spring here from behind, and then I'm going to push it off with an 11mm wrench. I'm going to try to set the camera here so you can see what it kind of looks like. Okay, so basically I'm just going to pull with this hand. I'm going to pop it off with this one. That's it. It's off. So now I can kind of get the rope out of there, or I could just untie it. I just got to make sure it's not pinned between the camshaft in there. So that's good enough for now. Now this rocker is loose. Once I undo these 2 screws, I can get that rocker out of there, change out the shim, and put it back together. So let me get this one off, and I'll show you when it's apart, and then I will show you putting it back on. It was a little hard to see exactly how this was set up, so I got a little bit of a better light. So I've got my 11mm wrench that I've got on the inside of the spring. I'm going to pull back to the rope right there. And another thing I forgot to mention is make sure the rope is on top of your wrench. That way it doesn't slide underneath and get pinned under the camshaft like I did. But even if you do that, you can just untie it and pull it out. So, all right, so I'm going to get this one off, and then I'll show you how to get these out. Okay, now I have both springs off of the intermediate rockers. And you know, after a couple tries, yeah, it went pretty fast. The first one took a little while to figure out, but this one took like 2 seconds. So it was pretty effortless. You don't really have to worry about scraping up this part of the camshaft either. As long as you're not touching the cam lobe, you're not going to hurt anything with that wrench levering on the cam. So now that spring is off, basically from behind, you can just slide the rocker right out of there and get it out of the way. The thing you have to be very careful with is you do not want to mix these up. They are matched in sets by cylinder, so once you get it out, make sure you put it down somewhere near where it's supposed to go. Same with this other one. Slide it out of there. It's kind of fiddly, but it doesn't really matter. It can't fall anywhere, really. You just want it out of the way. So that's out of the way. Next thing I want to show you here are the 2 main rocker shafts. If I can get it down in there close enough to see. Yeah, it's kind of dark. Right there, you can kind of see them. You got to make sure when you put everything back together that the rocker is on the valve spring. If it's not on the end of the spring, it won't fit right. So anyway, I've already taken off these 2 so you can see how loose it is. And if you can't quite get it out, just take a flathead screwdriver and you can just pry like so with your screwdriver, and it'll pop right out just like that. So now I've got this one out. And then basically putting in the new shim. You don't need to do that because it's thinner, so you can just slide it right in. And then I'll get those rockers back in, and then I'll show you the alignment before I put the springs back on. All right, now I've got the new shim installed, and I've got these two bolts up here loosely. You don't want to tighten this all the way down because you cannot put this back in until this has to be loose. So anyway, so the rocker here, I've kind of got it in place. So you want to start by putting the bottom end on top of the lower rocker and then sliding in the top piece. It can be a little bit finicky, but it doesn't really matter. Just got to kind of work at it until you get it to fit right. Of course, I just had this in here, but my camera ran out of space. So I'll get it in there. There we go. So now that one's in place. Oh, it fell out. Let's keep trying. Okay, there we go. Just make sure it stays there. So once that's there, you want to double check the other end and just make sure that this lower rocker is still on, and actually I can see that it's not, so I'm just going to make sure I slide that over onto that valve spring before I tighten this down. Okay, so I'm going to put both of these rockers back in place, and then I'm going to tighten these bolts down, and then I will show you putting the springs back on it all together. All right, I've got to get this all bolted together. I did leave number 2 here loose, so I want to show you here, when you've got them on right, they kind of just stay in place. You push them from behind. They should just kind of sit there nice and free. They shouldn't be stuck or anything like that. So once I bolt that down, put the springs on, and then I'll be done. I do want to recommend maybe starting with number 2. I started with number 4, but if you start with a hard one like number 5, I couldn't really see because of course the wiring harness is in the way. You might get a little frustrated. So if you start with one that you can see and get a feel for it, and then move on from there to the harder ones. Number 6 actually wasn't too bad. The spring back here does actually go over past the cam, but it didn't really matter in the end. Just be sure you don't accidentally drop that rocker down behind the engine, because that would really suck. The other thing too is make sure this spray bar right here, it actually feeds oil onto the eccentric shafts, the cam gear here. So make sure that is pointed in the correct direction. Double check that all your bolts are tight. Like I said, don't go too crazy. They don't have to be super tight. And you can easily shear off those little bolts. And finally, I would just double check to make sure there's no debris, little bits of rope or anything stuck in there. And I would rotate the engine a few times to make sure that nothing here is bound or stuck and it rotates freely. So in a recap here, the tools I used, really simple: flathead screwdriver, a little wrench, a little bit of rope, some gloves, because it actually does kind of hurt when you're pulling on this rope and pushing on there. Other than that, that's kind of the MacGyver way to do a MILV install without accidentally shearing off one of these bolts or damaging the threads. There are risks, of course, that you don't put it back together right, and that would probably be bad, but I think for me, I was much more comfortable doing it that way rather than messing with these things, because they can easily go really wrong really fast. All right, thanks.